just one of the incidents, but we're looking at all three of the incidents in Mark chapter 5 very briefly together this morning. That's my challenge, to help you through that today. Right. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he'd often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." But Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." And he gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. And the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. Then they came to see Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who'd seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who'd been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus didn't let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, that's the 10 cities of Galilee, how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people, well, they were amazed. As I say, you might do well to keep that open if you've got scriptures either on a device or in paper form in front of you, because we're going to be looking at all three of the stories there in Mark chapter 5, because they're linked together. We find, you see, in this chapter, 3 people who have life-changing encounters with Jesus: a man, a woman, and a child. They're all desperately needy. They're all somehow or other cut off from life. And they all need to meet Jesus. He's the only one that can make a difference between where they are and where they should be. I think it's the same for us this morning. Men, women, children, people who actually are perhaps more needy than we dare to admit. People who maybe are more cut off from life in all its fullness than we perhaps even acknowledge. As we encounter Jesus, the only one who can make a difference between where we are and where we could be, our lives are going to be transformed. And this morning, more than anything else, as we look into these stories, I want each of us, every one of you, no matter who you are and where you're from, I want everyone to know that you too can meet Jesus and have a life-changing encounter with him. So first, the man. We find this man on the edge of Lake Galilee. He's far from people. He's living actually among the dead because of the evil forces that control his life and have driven him to madness. He's put into some graveyard far away from folks, raging and cutting himself, uncontrolled and unrestrained. Our name, he says, is Legion. Such are the evils that have multiplied inside him. Thousands of contradictory forces that are pulling him this way and that way and giving him no rest. They're giving him no life. They're excluding him from his family, from his friends, and from society at large. A man who is barely alive, already condemned to living in the place of the dead. What a picture. Maybe you're going to not find this too easy, but I think that I can see a little bit of us all in this man. Certainly, when I look at him, I see a picture of what I might be without Jesus. Subject to all the insidious, cunning, and deceitful forces that are active in the world. These forces that seek to control our every move, that seek to dictate what we do without us even knowing it. Cut off from God's people and cut off from God's promises. And so, in the end, cut off from life itself, living a poor imitation, actually, of life as God intends it to be. Now, in his desperate need, this man is completely unable to get to Jesus. He's stuck where he is. So, in love and grace, Jesus actually arranged to come to him. He set sail, and I love this. He set sail to the very point where this man lives on the edge of Lake Galilee. It's as if he's an arranged appointment for Jesus, and immediately the man knows it. He knows that Jesus has come to him. Well, it's more than that, isn't it? Jesus has come for him. And I love that. What do you want with me? He asks Jesus. The first thing he says as Jesus gets out of the boat in our desperate need. When we find ourselves unable to make any change or any action that is changing where we're at, Jesus comes to us. He invades our space. And when we sense him at the edge of our lives, what do you want with me? It's actually not a bad question. Jesus wanted to free this man from the forces that bound him far more securely than the chains that were used to restrict him from time to time. Jesus wanted this man to experience life in all its fullness, life as God intended it to live or to be lived. And my friends, he wants that for you and for me now too. Nothing's too much for Jesus. For Jesus, this naked and raving man, dirty, living among the dead, is not too far gone to be restored, to be rescued. Instead, Jesus calmly confronts those forces that are controlling him, and he orders them out of the man. And when the other folks arrive at the scene, they find the man dressed in his right mind and sitting with Jesus. I love that picture. What a picture of peace and transformation. Can you imagine what it must have been like for that man with everything that had been roiling around inside him, and then to have that moment of release and the opportunity to start again? You know that Jesus wants to change your life too in encounter with him. He wants to decisively deal with everything that holds us back. All the evil forces of this world that mess with us, that mess with life as God intends it to be. He wants to drive them into the depths. Be gone, he cries. Shame and despair. The failures that stalk us and condemn us, perhaps in the quiet hours of the night. The secret sins that no one else knows about. The big things, the small things. Everything that's not life as God intends it to be. Jesus wants to drive them out to make room for his life in us. Let's turn and look again at that second part of the story. And here's where you do have, it would be good to have your scriptures open, because Immediately, Jesus crosses over by boat to the other side of the lake, and a crowd gathers around him while he's just even getting out of the boat. That's what happens in verse 21. And then one of the synagogue rulers, a guy called Jairus, comes to speak to Jesus. And once again, we find Jesus at the center of a crowd. Everywhere where Jesus goes, there's a crowd of people. And now he's trying to get to someone who urgently needs his help, because Jairus comes and says, please come and help my daughter. But the crowd is getting in the way. They're in the middle of the crowd. And this is where we want to stop and look at first before we go on to see why Jairus was asking Jesus to come. We find the woman, unnoticed, unseen. A poor woman who's subject to blood loss, not just for a while, but for 12 years she's been experiencing this. Imagine her weakness. Can you imagine how ill she felt? Once she had money and she had status and she had life, but these are long gone, together with most of her hope. There wasn't really much left to hold on to in her life, but something had awakened in her when she heard that Jesus was coming to town. The Jesus she had heard who gave people their life back. Maybe she thought, maybe if I can just touch his clothes, if I could just touch his cloak, I could be healed too. The last thing she wanted was to be noticed. She got used to living in the shadows, to living on the edge. And so the crowd actually for her weren't only in her way, they were her defense. And her plan was to go through the crowd and to use them to stay unseen. Maybe once again, I want to encourage you to think about this. You can see something of yourself. We can see something of ourselves in this poor woman. Is there perhaps something that holds us back from the very best of life? Is there something that's unexpectedly got in the way of hopes and dreams? Something that we maybe never even speak of or desperately try to hide? Something that wants us to stay anonymous and unnoticed? But like this woman, do you find yourself drawn to the person of Jesus? Not to church, no. Not to religion, not to any person of influence, not to an institution, but to the person of Jesus. Hoping, daring to hope, and to believe that he might just make the difference that you're looking for. So despite her weakness and despite the way in which she's been cut off from society by her illness and her frailty, this woman pushes through the crowd. She's determined to get to Jesus, whatever might be in her way, because maybe he's going to make the difference that she needs. And so I can just imagine her reaching through the crowd. You know, you've been in one of those pressed of crowds, maybe going to a football match or suddenly encountering a scene on the road or perhaps at some special event like, you know, when the Queen's cortege went through Aberdeen or something like that. And you pressed in, the crowd are all around. She stretches her arm through the crowd and she stretches and stretches and stretches, and she just manages to touch the tips of her fingers to Jesus' cloak. As soon as she does, she immediately feels it. Something changes. The bleeding that no doctor has been able to stop in 12 years stops. Energy and life seems to course back through her. And Jesus feels it too, the connection, the power that's gone from him into her. Of course, we know because he's the Son of God that Jesus knows every soul in that crowd. He knows the hairs on their head. He knows their histories. He knows their names, their experiences, their every thought. But he wants to complete his healing in this woman. And he knows that's only going to come from her acknowledging what has happened. So he asks, who touched me? Well, are you serious, Jesus? Asked the disciples. There are how many people pushing up against you in the hustle and bustle of this crowd? But Jesus persists, and I can imagine him somehow looking through the crowd and picking out this woman with his eyes. Because he knows. And she knows he knows. But she needs to step forward. And so she does, trembling and confessing what's happened, worried about what was maybe going to happen next. So imagine the blessing of Jesus' words to her when he says to her in verse, let's just find it, verse 34, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." The pull of faith draws us to Jesus. If only we could touch him, if only we could make the connection, then maybe what's wrong can be put right. We just don't know how to make that connection. There always seems to be perhaps so many things in the way. You know, if that's how it seems to you just now, there's a lesson here in this dear lady in Mark 5, in all her weakness, in all her desperation. And the lesson is this: just keep pressing through. If we but touch the hem of his garment, we too can be made whole. When we do, Jesus turns to us and says those same words: "Your faith has healed you. Go in peace." But there's more that he says to this woman, because she was healed physically, but there was still the pain of the last 12 years in her. We know she'd lost a lot of money. Mark tells us that because of her desperation to get what was wrong in her put right. Thank God that healthcare in our country doesn't cost our life savings. But had she also lost property and family and friends? Was she but a shadow of her former self? Had she even maybe lost her sense of identity? Not only did her bleeding need to stop, all the accumulated pain and hurt inside needed to go as well. Some of you know all about emotional and social pain, the hurts and pains that hold you back from the life that Jesus came to give. And you also need to hear what Jesus speaks to this woman in his final phrase, because he says to her, he says, "Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." With those words, he releases her. He gives her somewhere to put all the pain. He lets her leave it with him, and he enables her to move on in her life. He enables her to take hold of life in all its fullness. Be freed from your suffering. I wonder, are those words that you need to hear today from Jesus? As you encounter him, let him take your pain. There's one other person I want you to just meet in this account of three people: a man, a woman, and a child. You know, this clearly agitated man who falls at the feet of Jesus, Jairus, this synagogue leader, he pleads with him, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hand on her, because she might then be, please come put your hands on her," verse 23, "so that she will be healed and live." A heartfelt and earnest prayer, if ever there was one, driven by desperation and hope against hope. Maybe, Jesus, if I can persuade you to come, if you will only show your power, if you can do it on time, then what's wrong in my world will be put right. But frustratingly, even as Jesus begins to respond to that, the crowd are in the way. And then on top of all of that, this woman gets in the way to stop all progress. Imagine Jairus' frustration. "Jesus, can you hurry along now? My needs are the most urgent, don't you see?" But friends, Jesus, the Lord of space and time, he's never in a hurry. You could read the whole of the Gospels and you read all of the stories about Jesus, and Jesus is never in a hurry. But he's always, always on time. Remember that. Jesus is never too late, and he's never too early. He's always on time. That's why by his Spirit, he's here for us this morning. He's here with us this morning. "Behold," he says, "I stand at the door and knock. If you open the door of your life, if you open the door of your life when you hear that knock, he will come in. And he's always there for you and for me. But here in our story, he seems far from on time, because just as Jesus is finishing up with the woman, the agitated father gets the terrible news that he dreads most of all. Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Verse 35. Why bother Jesus? What can he do? It's too late. And maybe we feel the same way about the circumstances of our lives. What's done is done and can't be undone. Why bother Jesus? Well, here's a lesson on why from the teacher himself. Because Jesus turns to Jairus and he says these amazing words in verse 36. Don't be afraid, just believe. You know the Nike slogan, don't you? Just do it. Just do it. Well, here I think is the Jesus slogan. Just believe. Just believe. So they arrive, and Jesus announces, they arrive at Jairus' family home, and Jesus announces to hoots of derision from those gathered, the child isn't dead, but asleep. You see, he sees things differently. Where we can only see the end and the impossibility of things, he sees new beginnings and all kinds of possibilities. Why? Because what he says happens. Everything he says happens. Because his words are the words of life. And so he goes to the child and he takes her by the hand and he says to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. Although Mark takes the trouble to tell us that it's just two words in Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. It's Talitha Kumi. Talitha Kumi. And at once, the girl stands and walks around, and Jesus even has to prompt her amazed parents to give her something to eat. And just as we can see ourselves, perhaps, if we look hard enough in that crazed man and that poor woman pushing through the crowd, we can see something of ourselves, I think, in this little girl. Because we too were dead in our trespasses and sins. Without Jesus, there isn't any true life, just the shadow life that we experience, not the full life that God intends for all of us. Don't be afraid, just believe. The word of life, Jesus, unlocks unimagined possibilities, speaking life into all of us. My child, get up. He says to us, embrace his gift of life. Get up, eat, start living. Celebrate the life he gives and holds out for us all. You know, it's interesting to me that there is only one person named in the whole of Mark chapter 5 beside Jesus and his disciples, and that's Jairus. So why does Mark tell us his name, but not the name of the man, the woman, and the child? Well, I can only guess that Jairus was somehow known to first century readers, maybe a personality of his time. But as for the others, unnamed, I think Mark has got an intention in doing that, and it's perhaps so that we can identify with them. We are the crowd, curious to know more. But we're also the man, the woman, and the child, cut off from life by the forces beyond our control, cut off by pain and trouble, cut off even by death itself. And an encounter with Jesus changes all of those situations. Encounter with him leaves no room for the powers of evil. Encounter with him brings healing. Encounter with him brings life. For each of these folk, as for all of us gathered here this morning, this encounter is going to happen in different ways. Some of us will find that Jesus comes to us in our need. like he did with the man. Some of us are going to need to push through everything in our desperation to get to him, like the woman. And some of us, and here we're thinking of Alpha, some of us are going to need to have somebody come and bring us and take us to Jesus. Just like Jairus brought Jesus to his daughter. The point is, we all need to encounter Jesus again today. We all need his touch. We all need his life. And John's going to lead us in just a few moments in an opportunity to reflect on that as we take bread and wine together. And I pray that as you reflect, you will encounter the living Lord Jesus and allow his touch to change, his words to change your life. Thank you, John.